Welcome to Turmeric and Tequila with your host, Kristen Olson. Questioning a better way, one gracefully disruptive conversation at a time.
Welcome to Turmeric and Tequila. I'm excited to be with you here today. We've got an incredible conversation coming at you. Before we jump in, I want to give a little love to our sponsors, Lux Neuro, offering neurofeedback and counseling where your heart and mind align. For more information about what neurofeedback can do for you, listen to the neurofeedback stories of transformation in the middle of this podcast. Neurofeedback effectively treats everything from insomnia, anxiety, depression, trauma, ADHD, and much more. Optimize your brain. Special shout out to Declan James Watches, local to Colorado and veteran owned. 10% of all their proceeds go back to the Navy SEAL Foundation. And last but not least, Colorado Clownfish, our local family owned swim school, swim lessons and water safety training for all ages. We believe in life skills through sports. Come waterproof your family today. So without further ado, I want to welcome Michael Reddington to the TNT mic. Welcome.
Thank you, Kristen. It's great to be here.
Let's go. Yes. Full transparency. Michael's standing. He's a conditioned public speaker. So I already like the energy. I like where we've got lots we can explore, but we already have good vibes. So I'm going to read the bio. I even told this to Michael. I don't always read them, but I think it's pretty good to know his very diverse and interesting background to preface this cool conversation that's coming at you. Michael Reddington is an expert at moving people from resistance to commitment. He is an executive resource, certified forensic interviewer, president of Inquasive and Company, and author of The Disciplined Listening Method. Michael's public speaking career began in his teenage years as he traveled around New England educating audiences on the benefits of including students with and without disabilities in the same classroom. His speaking endeavors stemmed from several years of facilitating training courses for investigators at the organizations where he was employed. So boom, we got a lot to unpack here. But if you listen to Turmeric and Tequila, before we get into the mission, we like to get to the human. So tell us about young Michael. I always think stars are the future's in the stars very early on. But how are you as a kiddo?
Do I have to answer that publicly?
The FBI is not listening. Don't worry.
Yeah. I think, and I was actually talking to an FBI agent yesterday, and one of the things that we were talking about, our former FBI agent, and one of the things we were talking about is how the arc of our life ends up playing a role, often in ways that we can't anticipate or understand. So here I am, one day later, you're asking the same question. The universe works in mysterious ways,
right?
But I do think my childhood. I mean, I have two loving parents. I have a brother who's my best friend. We all experienced different things growing up, but I'm extremely fortunate, and that needs to be acknowledged. But when I think back to growing up and some of the challenges that I faced just kind of growing and maturing and having social challenges, and you mentioned some of the neurofeedback as we got started and things that might have helped me with a lot when I was younger, and a lot of the challenges I had growing up. Dealing with all of those, I never realized helped me for my future career because it forced me to become extremely in tune to what people were likely thinking and feeling all around me at all times. So I started developing that skill set unintentionally at a young age of, if you want to say, reading people's behavior, anticipating behaviors in communication and those kinds of things. So I played sports. Like I said, I come from a very loving and supportive family that I'm grateful for. But this has definitely been an unscripted, unintentional, accidental journey to go from where I am, starting out as somebody who I thought would always be a special education teacher and a baseball coach, to talking to you today.
There you go. Isn't that wild? I mean, you kind of nailed it. It's very serendipitous that you're on Turmeric and Tequila because it's my mission-driven varsity humans. We're going to fix it. We're going to plan it. We're going to do it a certain way. We're going to aim for the stars. And when you reflect, you're like, oh shit, I had very little control over all this. Like, you got to show up, you got to be intentional, but then you let go just enough and you're like, damn, thank God all those things happened early on. And there was like, something was molding me, whatever you believe in. I always say God, universe, Madonna, was shaping you for what you're doing right now. Was there any significant experience as a young human that you were like, that made you pivot, or that was an awakening where you're like, this shifted everything?
As like a young human?
Yeah, like a kid.
No, well, I don't think so. And
Okay.
I mean, on one hand, I wish I had this like one dramatic moment because it would be great for the conversation. But on the other hand, maybe it's great that I don't recall having that one
Yeah.
dramatic moment. I think for me, and I always kind of, I don't want to talk about my struggles and have them inadvertently compared to anybody else's, right? Because there are
Okay.
any number of thousands of people that went through struggles that make mine look like a walk in the park. So I want to be
Yeah.
like extremely careful with that. But I think just generally, growing up, I had a very hard time understanding how I fit in the world around me and who I was and who I was becoming and how I fit in and how people perceive me. And I communicate for a living now, but I had a really difficult time communicating back then and all of these things. So I don't necessarily think it was one moment that caused me to pivot at any point in my life. But I do think the culmination or accumulation of all the experiences that I had, and maybe at the top of the list, the near misses, and maybe the army of guardian angels that got me
Yeah.
through those near misses helped prepare me in very unexpected ways for what I do now. Because you hear people talk all the time about, withhold judgment and be empathetic and be in somebody else's shoes and be authentic to who you are and adapt to what people need in a conversation. For me, and I don't mean this to sound in any way unappreciative, that has not ever been something I've had to work hard to do because of all the places I've been before I got to where my career ended up. So I don't think it was one particular light bulb moment, but it's
Mhm.
the amalgamation of everything that led
Yeah.
to where I am now.
Amen. Excellent answer. I the grandiose, beginning and climax of a moment for the podcast is good, and it's definitely not necessary because it's got to be the truth. And the reason I ask these kinds of questions is we've got a pretty diverse audience on Turmeric Tequila, but I particularly aim to spark a light for our young people, knowing that you don't have to have it all figured out right now. Basically, speaking to my young self of, if you don't have it figured out, it doesn't make sense. You don't feel like you fit in. You feel misunderstood. It's more me just driving that message of universe, God, Madonna, larger order is in play, regardless of what you believe or how. We don't have that much control. And it's always adding up to something. And I think regardless of where your struggles land, because I'm with you, I'm a human of white privilege. I had accessibility to education and a roof over my head and many things. And we all have traumatic experiences in different capacities. So I appreciate you acknowledging it. And it is still a piece of the puzzle, whatever scale you put that trauma on, because our experience and that level of trauma is a major piece of our overall experience and mission and purpose. So it's all worthy of acknowledging, regardless of how much it impacted you comparatively to people that have gone through bigger things. It's still a piece of our puzzle. And I think anyone listening, anyone out there, can identify with what you're saying, and actually being like, oh, maybe my trauma isn't that big a deal, so you minimize it. And I don't think that's something we can do either at this point. So I'm with you on all sides. What was once you kind of started to get a vision of what you wanted to do, things started to come together. I want to say like maybe like after the college years or like late 20s. When did you really start to be like, okay, here's the career I want to pursue. Here's the public speaking. Sounds like you did that very early. When did things, a vision, start to come together? You're like, this is what I'm going to do. This is my purpose.
Yeah, it came together kind of in pieces, and like it's a reoccurring theme, but accidentally. And
Yeah.
I'll answer your question, I promise. But if I may, for 3 seconds, I want to bring together a couple of things that you just said. Everybody's different. Everybody's expectations, life story is different. But I've worked with guys who were older than me and had kids before I had kids, and they're talking about kids in high school. And I'm so frustrated. My kid doesn't know what he or she's going to do yet. I'm like, are you out of your mind? Like, they don't need to know what they're going to do now. Let life happen for them. Point them in the right direction. Expose them to good things. Help support their decisions. Support their mistakes. Like all these things, they will work it out themselves. I feel like some of the people who I know that were like on one track for so long, that didn't create all the positive outcomes they thought that it would. But
Right.
something else that you said that I'd love to build on for a second is you mentioned like puzzle pieces. I feel like a lot of times we're collecting puzzle pieces that are eventually going to build this beautiful picture, but we might not even realize it's a puzzle piece and we don't know what the hell the picture is going to look like in the end. So all of these experiences that we have, good, bad, and different, sometimes seemingly random, disconnected, you'd be surprised when things connect at different times in different places in different situations. So don't throw away or disregard any of those moments or connections or conversations, because you never know when one of them rears up and becomes valuable. And that kind of ties into how I got here. So yeah, you're probably right. It probably was in my mid to late 20s before I was like, oh, damn, this is what I'm going to do. And I'm sure most people have that moment in an interrogation room, because that's where that's really where it happened for me. But you mentioned it. Yeah, I was kind of fortunate to be in a public speaking role in high school, and then to have some training roles for different companies that I worked in. But I got into interview and interrogation entirely by accident. And I worked a couple of investigations back to back to back really early on, and got some reasonably substantial confessions for the context that I was in, and substantiated with evidence after the fact. They're wrapped up. And I remember calling my dad, because like a lot of families, we've been through lots up and downs, and especially sons and dads and all that stuff. And to tell him, like, hey, these are the things that I'm doing now. And my dad's an East Boston kid, and he's a military veteran and all this stuff. And so I tell him about these confessions I'm getting, and I'm hoping for, like, and my dad's awesome, don't get me wrong. But here I am, like, trying to make my dad proud. And I'm hoping for the great job, Michael, well done. You're on the right path. And instead I got, Michael, don't these people realize that if nobody talks, everybody walks?
Yes, Boston, let's go.
Yeah. And I'm like, well, Dad, let's not tell them that. But that got me thinking, like, okay, why are these people telling me the truth? And a huge portion of that goes back to the techniques that I've been taught. And I like to think some of that goes back to my ability to connect with other people, but why? And so I became really passionate about the way I phrase it now. Why do people choose to share sensitive information under vulnerable circumstances in the face of consequences? Because that's all a confession is. And whether we're talking to a kid that doesn't want to talk about what happened at school, an employee who maybe didn't commit a crime, but they said or did something that they shouldn't have, an actual investigation, it doesn't matter. Up here, it's the same. If you're not watching us, I pointed at my head. Upstairs, it's all the same thing. And so after maybe that first handful or so of investigations, I was like, this is it. This is it for me. This is what I want to do. And then eventually I was introduced to Wicklander, Zalowski and Associates, the interrogation, advising, and consulting firm that hired me. And I ran their investigations division for 10 years. And once I met a couple of those guys and saw what they did, I was like, okay, that's what I want to do. Because I've always thought of myself, for better or worse, right or wrong, other people's opinions may vary. I've always thought of myself as a teacher before anything else. And then so working for WZ is like, wait a minute, you mean I get to be an interrogator and a teacher, like, at the same time? And so I also recall the first time that I was out on the road with them and stood in front of a group of 50 people. And now here's my first time, like, teaching interrogation as a representative of this firm. And when I was done with that, I had another one of those moments, like, yeah, this is it. This is what I want to do. But again, it's all around teaching, like educating others, leaving people better off than they were before we had this conversation.
Let's go. Okay, I want to go back a little bit to this because I have 100 questions spinning right now. But tell me about like in your bio, the importance of accessibility and kids with different abilities to be combined in the classroom, because I feel like that's a major STEM piece for all of this, of telling the truth, facilitating a space for all of us that are different or misunderstood, or that just quote unquote don't fit in. Let's just keep it there. So the importance of being seen and being heard and seeking the truth. Like, tell me, why was that important to you early on?
Oh, man, we might need a team of psychologists to unearth why it was important to me early on. So I ended up changing high schools between freshman and sophomore year. And when I showed up for preseason football, there was one of the student managers was a student who I think it's still professional and respectful to say had disabilities and had things that he was working through. And so I got to know him a little bit and his older brother a little bit. And then when school started, it turns out this guy was in a couple of my classes along with another young man. And so I got to speak, and that was you. So I grew up in New Hampshire, and we're talking early 90s at this point. And it was unique, at least where I lived, to have the special education group integrated in the regular classrooms with everybody else. And so I got to start spending time not only with the kids, but also with the support staff that was in there with them. Kids, my peers, they were my age, but with the whole group together. And for me, I can say immediately, that might be a slight exaggeration, but really quick, saw the obvious benefits to all involved for having them in the class. Like, their learning opportunity is better, their social potential is better. Now we are learning skills from watching how they learn, empathy, understanding, all these other things, right? So I was actually pretty passionate about that really fast. And I'm sure there's something in my background and how I was raised and how I saw myself and things that I dealt with, and hence the team of psychologists. We might need to truly piece this all out. But I absolutely felt like a direct connection to what they were experiencing and the importance of it. And so the more time I spent working with the support staff, I ended up getting hooked up with the Institute on Disability at the University of New Hampshire. And then when they would go on, for lack of a better term, like speaking tours or going to different educational events, they asked me if I would go give my perspective as a student in the class. And then that's how that started. So initially I went to school for special education, and my first job out of college, I was a 7th and 8th grade special education teacher and baseball coach. And I thought that's all I would ever do. You know, I really enjoyed it. And then I had friends in the financial industry in the 90s making way more money than me, and I'm susceptible to peer pressure. And when they told me to try it, I did. And I lasted 2 years, 1 month, and 2 days in that next job before I decided this ain't for me. And, you know, the dominoes continued to fall, and now here I am.
That's wild. Well, I love this so much. Number one, you influencer marketing, and we can unpack that later. That's my background. So yeah, the peer thing, but it only lasts so long if it's not authentic to the heart. But what I love about your passion for diversity and inclusion and people of all abilities being in the same classroom is the opportunity early on where you had to, or you got to connect and communicate with someone that connects and communicates different than you. And that's like the base of your entire job right now. So that heart space early on, I think, is such incredible intel of like who you are, but such an incredible educational opportunity for you to make you good at what you do now, outside of the degrees and the coaching and the teaching and all that stuff. Like, very early on, you learned how to communicate with someone that communicates different than you. And that's what our world needs right now in 2024, 2025, because we all kind of communicate differently, regardless of ability. Maybe it's because you're on your phone all the time, or men versus women, or whatever it might be. Like, we have to find this way to connect. So I'm curious, when, you know, it came from this heart space and then you started public speaking, and you are now the president of Inquasive. Tell me how you molded all this together and put this passion into Inquasive and what you guys do specifically.
So I'll go back to the puzzle analogy that you kicked off earlier, and it's a great spot on the early career and passion for that. So for me, I just feel like I'm helping support people that need support, and a lot of them were unable to speak, and some of them couldn't speak in a way that was easy to understand, and a lot of them had behavior modifications. And when I started working with adults, some of them had absolutely horrendous life stories about coming out of a state school environment where they were abused and how that impacted how they communicate and all those things. So you're right. You know, that evaluation and communication education that I had for, I have to go do the math real quick, and I suck at math, especially under pressure, but you're probably talking about 6 or 8 years of experience in that world before I ever became an investigator. So all that helps. But how we bring it together. So I'm in investigations for 15 plus years. I'm working for WZ, traveling the world, doing all these things. And especially in the private sector, the CEOs, the executives would pop their heads in while I'm training the investigators. And with relative frequency, they'd be like, hey, what are you doing later? Can I buy you a beer? Which I don't know that I've said no to more than twice. I've got this negotiation, this customer, this employee, this manager, whatever. Can you help me out with? So we would sit down and we would problem solve their communication challenges. And it dawned on me that these executives are solving the same communication problems in their meetings that I'm solving for in the interrogation room, but they have these different titles and these different assumptions and stereotypes. And so I say nobody, I'm sure other people probably had to some degree, but nobody that I was aware of was really combining the two. So that's where the passion really lit for me to start bringing this all together. So then I started doing the research. I was already a certified forensic interviewer at that point. So I was transitioning away from straight up interview and interrogation research into business communication in all facets. And when I was doing that, again, accidentally, it comes together that the cognitive process interrogation suspects experience when they commit to truthfully saying I did it is essentially identical to the cognitive processes employees go through when they commit to saying I'll do it, and customers experience when they commit to saying I'll buy it. Like, well, shit, if up here it's all the same thing, why are we doing it different ways? So I hadn't realized, I don't think, that I've been collecting all of these puzzle pieces for so long. So I have to give the team at WZ an immense amount of credit. I have tremendous respect for them, a great relationship with them. But we sat down and really made the decision that they are the tip of the spear in interview and interrogation. They want to stay that way. I wanted to go more the executive education, interpersonal communication. So I did, and that's when I started Inquasive and wrote the disciplined listening method. But what it says on the cover of the book, unlock hidden value in every conversation. And that's what we bring all these tools together to do. So when I set out to do this, really a huge part of it was to go get the research, the stories, the experience, the methodology from these potentially divergent sources and put them together in a way. So whether I'm talking to my young son, whether my wife and I are negotiating something for the family, whether I'm consulting, whether I'm teaching, whether I'm investigating, whether I'm working with the sales team, we're adapting it, but those same fundamental principles apply to all.
Boom. Do your wife and your son, do you get into like conversation? They're like, don't do your trickery on me. Like, are they wise to the game?
My son, a couple of times, he's in elementary school still. My son, a couple of times, has just looked at me. Like when I say with astonishment, it's not that hard to astonish a young kid in elementary school. Don't get me wrong, but you can see his little wheels turning and being like,
yeah.
How did you know that? Or how did you get me here? But honestly, people ask me, I tell him everything. Like I want him to, like a lot of the skill set that I have came from how my father raised my brother and I. My mom too, there's a real combination of them. But with Gabe, like my wife's the chief human resources officer. We're constantly working through things, talking through things. I'll explain to him where things come from, how we got here, be a problem solver, all these kinds of things. So we work on it with him. Thankfully with my wife, there's a couple of ways that I've been operationally conditioned to talk to help people save face. Okay. And every once in a while, if she's asking, well, it's every once in a while now, it used to be a little bit more frequent. If she asks me for like my opinion or my feedback or something, and I naturally default to one of those, then she'll get on me. She's like, I asked you about me, tell me, don't do that with me.
I know, that's right.
But for the most part, I'm fortunate. My wife actually reminded me this morning that was 15 years ago this week we met when she saw me speak. So she's kind of been behind the curtain for our entire relationship.
That's what's up. Well, congratulations on 15 years. That's no joke. Let's go.
Thank you. Yeah, condolences to her for sure, but congratulations to me.
We'll go with that. It's so funny. So I have 2 brothers and 3 younger brothers, 2 in military. One was on the intel side, and so I can tell when he's doing like his magic, and I'm like, like I haven't run your laps, but I've had a lot of conversations. I spent a lot of time around humans. I've coached forever. Like, don't do that with me. Like, I see where you're going on certain things. But they're both like incredibly smart and talented with what they do and great with people. I got to ask, like, tell me a little bit more about the investigative side. Like, give me the tea and the juice on, like, were you with, police, FBI, whatever you can share. And then I want to know if there's, like, good stories in that where it's like stuff you couldn't believe. I just had a guy on that talked about social engineering, and I was like, God dang, like, some of our criminals out there are just masterminds. Like, do you by chance have any good story you want to share within that?
Yeah, I didn't work for any secret agency, so there's nothing I probably shouldn't drop names, but there's nothing that I can't really share. And I will say before I circle back again and answer your question, yeah, in a lot of ways, being an investigator, we're always playing catch up.
Totally.
And I'm speaking in very broad terms and painting in broad brushes, but nefarious individuals or those with negative intents trying to find like a positive-ish way to say it, their mission in life is to stay ahead of the curve. And especially as technology grows and changes, they invent new curves to stay ahead of. So we're constantly playing catch up. And I used to laugh that by the time an investigation gets to us, we're the last to know. Like, we are the last to know, because even people that found out about it first were trying to fix it, take care of it, handle it. And when they couldn't, then they finally bring it to us. I mean, we're always the last to know in playing catch up. So my career as a direct investigator, well, I guess I always technically was a direct investigator, but I started out in the private sector. So a lot of theft, fraud, embezzlement, those kinds of, I guess, white collar-ish cases. On the personal side, it would have been more like the sexual harassment, discrimination, workplace violence, like those kinds of investigations. Then when I got to WZ, it was still all of those, but now we had some more of your stereotypical crimes that we would help investigate as well. And some of those got a little bit more juicy. I was never the primary, but I worked on teams where we did solve cold murder cases and did some pretty cool things. But it is far, and I was never law enforcement. I never wore a badge. I'm very fortunate that I've interrogated on behalf of law enforcement. I've trained any number of law enforcement, any number of federal agents, some military interrogators around the world, not just here in the United States. But I never wore a badge. I never wore a uniform. And I want to be very, very clear and upfront about that. So I'm fortunate for the work that I got to do with them. But to get back to juicy stories, it's funny when people ask that. I think it's funny when people ask that question, because I try to think about, okay, what do people expect for an answer? Like, so there I was with this person in this room and the light bulb is swinging and I don't know what to say next. So for me, I feel like, I think a lot of people may feel the same way for the job they do. If I do my homework and I prepare well enough, then this story should be kind of boring. Like, there might be a little bit of a surprise, but if I do everything well enough prior to shaking somebody's hand and starting a conversation, then there shouldn't be like a lot of juice and a lot of things that happen, because I'm sitting down and treating somebody like a normal, respected human being. They're preserving their dignity. They're saving face. They're protecting their self-image. In a lot of ways, they feel like they're in control of this conversation. So by the time they're done writing their written statement, it just felt like two people talking in a room for 90 minutes or however long we've been here. But I mean, I've had some, I guess, funny stories over the years. Once I had to interrogate 3 people in 3 different rooms at the same time. So that was a bit of a challenge, kind of bouncing back and forth and trying to do, it's almost like pause, I'll be right back, and trying to pause all 3 conversations at the same time in the same place and come back. So that was fun. I did one. I actually showed up. It wasn't supposed to be an investigation. I was doing a safety and security evaluation for a multi-use property. And somebody just happened to mention that they thought, and this is, for context, we're going back probably 12 years, and the world has changed a lot in 12 years, especially in Colorado in 12 years. But there was some suspicion that one particular employee was doing drugs while at work. And I'm a live and let live guy for the most part. But if you're carrying a loaded weapon at work, you should not be doing drugs while you're doing that. I think regardless of how people feel about drugs, I think we can all agree that if you have a loaded sidearm, you should not be under the influence while carrying that. So that was one that literally I went from not thinking I was going to interrogate anybody that week to being in an interrogation 5 minutes later. And it turned out he confessed that he'd been doing it on average 3 times a day, every day for 4 years, I think it was 4 or 5 years. So that was a fun one. Yeah, there was, I think for me, some of the ones that were entertaining were the ones where the technique plays out, which again sounds like anticlimactic to other people, but you know your techniques, you trust your techniques, and they work the way they're supposed to when they're supposed to. Like, those are the ones that stick out in my head. There was one guy, he was suspected of fraud, and he was a big bully in the beginning of the conversation, and he ends up confessing to, I don't know that he confessed to all of the fraud he did. Like, I'm sure he had a shutoff valve somewhere, and he told me like 85 to 92% and preserved his self-esteem by not telling me about the rest of it. Fine. But literally, as I was setting up the room, the investigator that was helping me from this company told me that he had been suspected of stealing autographed sports memorabilia, but they never could prove it was him. So could I get that too? And now I'm sitting there going, wait a minute. Oh, and for context, this guy was about to get promoted to vice president when they started hearing rumors that he was committing fraud. So my direction was, we don't have enough time to do an investigation. This is a direct quote. If you can get him to confess, we'll fire him. If you can't, we're going to make him vice president. So you called me in under that pretext, and now you're asking me to also get this potentially stolen autographed sports memorabilia that you were going to auction off for charity. And so at the end of that, it was, I don't know how many sports fans are listening, but it was Jim Thome. He's a Hall of Fame baseball player.
Okay.
So it was signed Jim Thome pictures. And there was a bunch of them. And so at the end of the interrogation, after he admitted to everything else, I thanked him for his time and for his professionalism, which eventually he was professional. And I said, can I ask you one more question? And he said, yeah. I said, how many days will it take you to bring the Jim Thome pictures back? And his eyes get about as big as my head. And he says to me, tomorrow, and I'll bring the Mike Ditka footballs back too. They didn't realize he had stolen the Mike Ditka footballs. So I'm sure that like you asked that question expecting this like crazy, like as seen on TV case. But my sarcastic, ironic, entertaining brain hangs on to stuff like that. When it was like, this is the situation. And by the way, here are your footballs that you had no idea he stole to begin with. Those are some of the things that kind of stick with me.
Oh, that makes complete sense. And yeah, Hollywood has certainly shifted or shaped our reality and in expectation of what, what anticipated answers might be. I was thinking more, you'd be like, yeah, we had a soccer mom that was 50 and she embezzled $46,000 to $100,000 from that kind of stuff.
Some of those for sure, where I just cut you off.
No, you're good.
But yeah, like the person, one of the things I learned early on is that for your like longer term frauds, your longer term thefts, that it not always, but it very often ends up being whoever the like main suspect ends up being gets this reaction. It could never be that person. No, actually it is, because they had the access, they had the trust, they had no additional oversight. Everybody took their word for everything. So yeah, I've got a couple of those where like it feels a little weird to sit down and interview like my mom or my grandmother, but here we are. And yes, they are the ones who are responsible for this. But like to your point earlier, it all goes back to withholding judgment, being empathetic. And I know those words get thrown around a lot, but one of the lessons that I learned for sure in a career of investigations is that I would bet, I'm going to say 90%, it could be 98% of the people that I interviewed would have made a different decision if they were experiencing a different set of circumstances. So don't get me wrong, like they're still accountable, they're still responsible, there's still consequences for their actions. I'm not saying everybody gets a pass because of it, but just from one human being to another, like to embrace the universality of the human experience. If they were in a different set of circumstances, they would have made a different decision. That is human. So if I can understand that going into the conversation, then whether it is your stereotypical Hollywood criminal or whether it is the woman you see at the grocery store every afternoon, they're still a human being, and they didn't make the decision because of their DNA. They made the decision because they were a human being experiencing some sort of stress and discomfort, and they didn't see another way to get through it. So they acted the way they did at that time. And the ability to understand that not only made me a better investigator, but I believe other people would have to vouch for it. It made me a better manager. It made me a better leader. It makes me a better youth sports coach. It makes me a better husband. Just understanding that context plays such a bigger role. And when we ignore that, we're shortchanging ourselves and everybody else.
Amen. So well said. I actually think that plays right back into your initial experience as a young person, where you walk in and there's people of different abilities, and you're a fool to assume either one is more valuable than the other. Because even though we communicate differently or we're understood differently, we have different experiences, we are still part of that common human shared experience of where oftentimes we are acting mostly to protect ourselves or to make something because it's a necessity, or it's something that we're doing to get by. So I think that's a really beautiful message, and I really thank you for sharing that, because that is the through line of actually turmeric and tequila, seemingly opposing things can harmoniously coexist, and we're all kind of working to get this world and life figured out together, and that conscious space of empathy, lack of judgment, and just knowing that, like, before we get into anything, we're both humans. We're both coming from some sort of common ground. How do we work our way backwards? What I really want to know is what you talked about very early on. How are you getting, what is the magic that gets people to confess in this stressful moment, or, the wife, the son, the close ones, like, how are we navigating the space? Like, what's the magic there? And I'm assuming that's the book, but give us the cliff notes. You don't have to give away the secrets, but
I will give all away secrets. I don't care.
let's
I would
go.
still appreciate people buying the book. There's a lot
There you
more
go.
in there than we can get in 30 minutes, but I'll give everything away. It all starts with part of what we just talked about, helping people save face and protect their self-image. All too often, we communicate with people in ways that are convenient, comfortable, and common for us, but cause somebody else to feel the need to defend themselves to some degree. And as soon as that happens, we've now created more barriers that were already there. So when we think about the disciplined listening method, and I'll keep this short, but essentially the riddle we set out to solve when we created it was, how come some people go into conversations that they have no business being successful in, yet they're routinely successful? Like, what are they doing differently than everybody else? So that was the premise that set us out to solve that riddle and put this whole thing together. So a couple of the things that we have learned is that when we go in to have a conversation with somebody else, if they have information and we need it, they are in control of this conversation. I don't care who you are. I don't care what your title is. I don't care what your relationship is. They have the info. They're going to be the ones that decides what they can share and under what circumstances. They're in control. So the sooner we can relish our lack of control and get the hell out of the entitlement trap, the better we can do moving away from executing communication experiences that are comfortable for us and creating communication experiences that our counterparts need. So if we want somebody to say or do something that's not initially their idea, now, by the way, I'm assuming for the purpose of this conversation that it's all ethical and it's all for the betterment of the relationship, the initiative, the organization, those kinds of things, that we need to create the communication experience that they require, so they will commit to whatever this new course of action is. And that is true, whether it's an interrogation, whether it is a leader who is announcing a new change of direction to an organization, whether it's a performance management conversation, whether it's me talking to my young son about his choices at recess. Like, it's all the same. So with that as a backdrop, really with the disciplined listening method, we're looking to create those communication experiences for other people and uncover hidden value. So get out of that check the box mentality. And now I'm looking and listening for these indications of other threads to pull, additional context that help paint this full and often unintentional picture. So if I can help people save face and protect their self-image, I might be 90% of the way home just with that. But the other two things that we found are often in play are people need to believe that we're credible in the situation. And a lot of times it's extremely helpful if they believe the truth either is already known or will imminently be known. So I would never coach bluffing. I would never coach bragging. However, sometimes just with a little turn of phrase, a little flip of how we speak, it lands differently in somebody's brain. They see additional credibility in us. They have the opportunity to save face, and they feel far more comfortable being truthful in scenarios that they might otherwise have chosen not to.
Okay, so this has my wheels spinning because everything you're saying makes complete sense. I'm just trying to visualize an example, and maybe you have a good one of this because I know you're simplifying a kind of complicated process if you're not good at it, but obviously you are. So if if you're interrogating someone, or it's a company trying to figure out if someone stole from them, you're in the conversation. Is it just like building the rapport, being like, hey, how are you? Let's go, or let's talk about your family. And like you segue the conversation, and then you kind of build that know, like, and trust, like in sales. And then you kind of implement specific questions, or tell me how, like, you're building that rapport, like shifting it into like the direction you want it to go.
Yeah, and we can even take it out of investigations for your audience if you'd like. But in an investigation, yeah, it always starts with rapport. Always.
Okay.
And it's a delicate dance. It can't be skipped. It's a delicate dance. If we try too hard to build rapport, it looks manufactured and it has an inverse effect. So usually just to tell me a little bit about yourself. Let's find something that we might have at least close to in common. It doesn't have to be identical, hopefully in 2 to 3 minutes tops. And then we start segueing into the conversation. But It's tools in a toolbox. So anytime somebody says to me, Mike, how do I get person X to say or do Y? I always start with 3 follow-up questions. What's your goal? Who do you have to achieve it with? And what's the context of the situation? Because once we have those 3 questions answered, now we can open the toolbox and start choosing which is the best tool set in order to be successful under those circumstances. The technique that I use the most and would still default to more often than others, it's not the only technique for sure, generally starts with a window of building credibility where I'm not telling anybody that I know what they did, but I'm illustrating, I'm teaching them that this is the role of the investigator and these are the things investigators do and these are the tools that they have available. And now by going through that illustration, somebody who has in fact done something they shouldn't have, they've made a regrettable decision, now gets to sit there and go, oh, I wasn't aware of all of that. Wait a minute. And now as I'm building credibility, they're trying to process, what's this about? Where is this going? What does this have to do with them? Then after that, we get into the face-saving process. So once we've built credibility, then they've had the chance to save face. Now we can go ahead and start asking questions to get to the truth. But in to over summarize, it's really those 3 steps. In a lot of ways, the same thing is true in sales. I mean, when we talk about sales, I'm sorry, did I talk over you again?
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay, cool. So we talk about sales, you mentioned like know, like, and trust, like we're in sales. A lot of times people default to building credibility. I'm going to be a little bit sarcastic here by coming off as saying, let me tell you, Kristen, I'm awesome. I've been doing this for a really long time with the company that has really great stuff. We are awesome. In fact, we're so awesome. I'm going to start asking you to tell me all the warts and problems you have with your company right now. So that way I can give you these great solutions you'll pay me lots of money for. And I'm exaggerating, hopefully for a little bit of entertainment effect. But a lot of times our approach of, hey, let me tell you how great I am right out of the gate creates that impression. So even little word changes, like, Kristen, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today. Often at this point in the process, organizations ask to have a conversation with us because they are currently trying to achieve these 3 things while trying to solve these 3 problems and looking for a partner who creates this type of experience to work with.
Boom.
Right now. So just in that 90 seconds, if I filled in the blanks, that 90 seconds it takes to do that, it's obviously not my first rodeo because I was able to make that illustration. I'm clearly credible because I've been here before. And the truth is obviously already known because how the hell else would I have been able to put that together at the start of the conversation? I'm instantly more credible. Now, if we start working in Cialdini's work and the psychology of persuasion and the 7 automatic mechanisms of persuasion, you feel nearly obligated to follow up and say, well, thank you, Mike. Actually, our situation's a little different. Let me tell you all about it before you ever ask me a question. So now I'm building all of that in the same way in an early sales conversation that I would in an early interrogation because we're capitalizing on how we know the mind works, what they need to experience in a way that doesn't create a greater divergence. I mentioned the entitlement trap earlier. It is safer for us to assume that people have more motivation to withhold information than they do to share it. Because if we just assume they'll share it and they don't, we're in trouble. But if they assume they're going to withhold it and we prepare accordingly, and it turns out they were just willing to share it anyway, we're still good. There's no additional risk there.
I love that. Well, amen to that. And it's so funny because I know you have tried and true reps, experience, scientific, backing on why this works, but also you really lean heavy into the human experience, being a human, like all these in-betweens and non-measurables are so critical. And the upside of social media, obviously there's a lot of downside, is we have way more conscious consumers, conscious young humans that know how to do the research, know how to train, know how to find the answers. And there's a lot of gray area there, but they know. So if you're not coming in some sort of authentic space or with conscious language, conscious of holding space and the empathy, all those things, they're going to see through the BS early on. And so we're dealing with a very different landscape than you and I were, because our generation is different than our young people coming up. But we grew up with social media and the internet and everything else. So you can kind of even learn these techniques and figure it out. So if you can't build that human rapport, the stuff that's really not measurable, a lot of this just doesn't work. So I'm super fascinated by this. And I also really appreciate that you highlight this, and even in your business bio, about ethics and this moral code that's a piece of it, because of course all of this can be used for bad, but also a lot of this can be used for good. How much of that with you and your company is that like the forefront of like, this moral compass has to be the North Star?
It's right at the front, because you're right.
Yeah.
Like if you went and picked up a book on influence, one of the like real reputable science-backed good ones, and then you went and picked up a book about some of the more famous con artists, in history, you'd be like, wait a minute, the things that they're telling me to do in my life are the things that these people are doing. Yeah, it's a double-edged sword for sure. There's the obvious applicable Star Wars reference in here somewhere, I'm sure. So yes, when you talk about, and I just nerded out with somebody about this yesterday, is it influence? Is it persuasion? Is it manipulation? Is it inspiration? How are we connecting with people? In many ways, it all comes down to what are the goals we're looking to achieve? What are the tools we're looking to achieve them with? And what's the awareness of the people we're working with in regards to the goal we're trying to achieve together? So if I'm legit working to achieve something with somebody that objectively is a positive outcome. There might be some uncomfortableness along the way, but it's objectively a positive outcome. And I'm using ethical tools. I'm not coercing them. I'm not tricking them. I'm not forcing them. I'm not threatening them. We're working through it together. Now we're on that moral, ethical side. From the investigation world, moral, legal, ethical side. But if in any way I'm trying to trick somebody, I'm coercing them, I'm threatening them, and this is a very clear win for me, lose for you situation, now we're on the wrong side of that line.
I love this. It's so applicable to everything we do in life, again, because life is about connection and communication and how we are getting through this together. I'm a longtime athlete, so all my analogies stem back to like sports experience, but that's what it is. My most successful teams are the ones where we authentically bled it together. It was never about the in game or the paycheck. In women's sports, that was sparse, but it was never about, it was about, we wanted to compete, do the right thing, and get to that in line or in game or championship together. And that's really what life is. So like that consciousness of morality and doing the right thing, as cliche as it is, it's such the important base of all of our decisions moving forward. And I'm always fascinated. I'm like, how do we inspire our kids to do the right thing or want to be a good person? And I think it comes back to, like, again, my lens is influencers or top athlete or whatever, about walking in it and being that lead example and telling the truth and being transparent and facilitating that space and conversation. Why I have the podcast, to say this is a safe space to be yourself, and before you do it, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to facilitate, and be the example, and try and be the best version of myself. So I feel like you've done that from day one, and now you've learned the tools and the education and the accolades, but it's kind of always been there. Now you've just refined the process.
Well, day one might be a stretch, but for a long time, like, there are definitely some stumbling blocks and hurdles and things to overcome along the way. My own decisions where I went left and maybe I should have gone right, or vice versa, that kind of thing. But you're 100% right. And so I have a son in elementary school, and we were just talking the other day, as kids do when they grow up, he and his little best friend, they've been best friends since daycare, and they're still in school together, kind of having a little momentary sort of falling out between them. And we were talking with Gabe about standing up for himself, not in the physical sense, but, you're setting kind of, this is what I will and won't do, those kinds of things. And he told me how he said that. And then when his little buddy wanted to do the old thing, my son turned around and walked away. And I'm like, dude, do you know how proud I am of you for doing that? Like, I know it had to hurt your feelings. I know it wasn't easy to do. I know you probably felt lonely after that. I'm extremely, regardless of what happens next, I'm super proud of that. And the conversation led to exactly what you just said. And I used myself as an example. I'm like, dude, if I tell you to stop playing ball in the house and then I bounce a ball off your head, you're going to keep playing ball. So if you tell your buddy, I'm not playing this game anymore, but then you go do it, what's your buddy going to keep doing? He's going to keep playing the game. So sometimes being the one who has that little, and I'm not always the most disciplined person, don't get me wrong, but who has that little extra bit of discipline or that little extra bit of consistency, willpower, whatever it is, to set the example, then that sets the expectations for everybody else. And to bring it home in these conversations, if I'm asking people to be open and honest with me, but I'm very clearly not being transparent, not being vulnerable in my conversations, it's just never going to work.
There you go. Yeah, and our young people also know. I've had extraordinary lessons. I started this podcast to get good people doing good things, telling the truth, because coming from marketing and branding, that is not usually the case. And every conversation, I learned something I take away, and I very quickly learned, I've got to be 100% transparent. If we want to get into the minutia of things, or like ask, tell me something as a kid, blah, blah, blah. Like, you got to show up and give that, particularly with young people, and my varsity humans that get it, have run these laps. Like, they're going to see through it. And I'm not a skilled social engineer, but we've worked with a lot of people in coaching. Like, you can kind of tell if someone's full of shit or not. And you're like, this is going to be a good convo. It isn't. I've been very fortunate. I have great people, but it is. It starts walking in it. And while we can, do the podcast, write the books, do the things, it's what you're doing every day. And all those falls from graces, imperfection, you need all that, because that's what builds your empathy. So the mistakes and the mess ups are really key pieces. Because like you said, it's someone, you're dealing with people that probably would have made a different choice had they had, different opportunity or in a different context. And so our own mistakes are really key pieces of the puzzle as well.
They're huge, and they also make the best learning opportunities. Our brains are literally wired to learn more from our mistakes than our successes, or failures than our successes. When somebody else makes a mistake, it is the single best time to build empathy and bonds and connections and help them, because they're at their most vulnerable. So to help them and pick them up there is a super opportunity. And then when you talk about like being transparent and being vulnerable and helping other people, talking about our own mistakes. So for me, it certainly sounds like my level of athletics fell short of your level of athletics. But when I'm coaching youth sports, which right now it's like elementary school age, so very quickly my son is about to skill out of my ability to coach him. But when I'm coaching baseball, I can talk about the first time I struck out, well, the first 100 times I struck out, right? But I can talk about mistakes I made, errors I made, and it makes the kids laugh and it helps them learn. Coaching kids jujitsu, I can go over and they're trying to learn an armbar, and I can say, the last time I tried that, I got swept and triangled, and they start giggling, and now they're willing to listen to me. So in business, even saying, when the first time this was explained to me, I thought I knew it. I went out and made these 2 mistakes. So let me ask you, how can we talk through? So you go out and make your own mistakes, you don't repeat mine. Like, these types of approaches unlock opportunities that trying to act like we're perfect or we know, or we don't have any mistakes. Even if somebody looks at you and says you don't understand, please look them in the eye and say, you're right, I don't. Just those brief moments of transparency can redefine relationships.
Let's go. And we're taught, like, our society, we're kind of conditioned to be that other way, like learning sales or coming off the team. I think particularly for men, you need to be this bravado, macho, I got the answers. If you don't like it, I'm going to beat you up. Like that. I mean, we're conditioned in so many ways. So I think what you're doing and your approach to life, and even just your day-to-day way you're walking through this world, is a phenomenal example of how we can condition our own perspective on things, empathy, and holding space for others. I think it's massive. The disciplined learning method, go check it out. I will plug it right now. But my last question for everyone, and I have 100 more questions for you, but we'll wrap it up here because I want people to go get the book and dig into what you've got going on. But what is success to you?
Oh man, I'm supposed to answer that fast. What are you doing to me?
No, there's no timeline here. Follow your heart.
No, I think success is going to be different from person to person and situation to situation, but it has to tie into goal accomplishment and I'm losing my words here, realizing potential. And it can be incremental. It doesn't have to be all at once. It doesn't have to be the big end win, but for me, I keep talking about my son. If people are tired of hearing about my son, I'll talk about something else. But when I pick him up from school every day, I ask him 3 questions. What was the best part of your day? What did you learn? And who did you help? And I'm trying to build it into Gabe's brain that your average successful day is something cool happened. I learned something and I did something nice for somebody. So that's success. So I think, speaking personally for me, this is going to sound a bit cheesy, but success is I have an interaction with somebody and they're better off for it. I mean, that in and of itself is success. And you could start putting business parameters or money or or all these other things. But really what we have at the end of the day is overlapping and interwoven chains of relationships and experiences. And if my little pieces of those chains makes people better, then I've been successful.
I love it. I love it so much. And thank you for sharing the personal stories. I'm here for the business, like athlete, entrepreneur, and the book and all those things. And I always tell my parents, you are your kid's first influencer. You're the leader. So I think that's the most important job in the world. So I love that you share those personal things and you're building this little human right now because, he's going to outlast you and he's got stuff to do. And I think that impact is the most important. Business, all this stuff is great. But our young people, I really do believe, is where it's at. And they're going to be a bigger voice than we will ever be, even if we're intentionally on mics. They're a ripple effect, and there's a butterfly effect there. I could even call him like your very most important brand ambassador, but we won't businessify everything. I love it. Where do we find you? The book, I'm super fascinated. I really encourage people. I interview a lot of humans. I love the energy, but I think you're deeply interesting, and I think all of your pursuits stem from a very authentic space. So personal endorsement on what you going on. But where do we find you? Links, handles, anything you want to share?
I appreciate it. So if you want me on social media, please, I'd be happy to connect with anybody on LinkedIn. Michael Reddington, CFI, is the best place for that. The book people can learn much more about the book, even sample chapters and whatnot before they choose to buy, if they do so, at disciplinedlistening.com. If they want to learn more about me, michaelreddington.com. Learn more about the programs our clients ask us to facilitate for their leaders and sales teams. That's all at Inquasive.com.
Boom.
And
there you go.
It's available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
Okay, let's go. Barnes & Noble, let's go. Okay. Special thank you to our sponsor, Lux Neuro, Neurofeedback and Counseling. Lux Neuro wants to meet you if you're ready to transform your life. Visit them at luxneuro.com to schedule an appointment. Declan James Watches, veteran-owned. Check them out, especially during holiday season. Colorado Clownfish Swim School, swim lessons and water safety training for all ages. They believe in life skills through sports, so come waterproof your family today. Check them out at coloradoclownfish.com. Michael, I appreciate your time and energy. If you're listening and you are a podcaster, wherever you can find your podcast, if you want to watch us on video, we are on YouTube. So come join us. Thank you for joining this incredible conversation, and we'll be with you again soon. Cheers.
Thank you for joining Turmeric and Tequila with your host, Kristen Olson. Tune in next time, and don't forget to subscribe on Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.